The whole restaurant went quiet when he walked in, not because of the suit, though it cost more than most people in that room made in a year, not because of the two men who flanked him like shadows that had learned to breathe, not even because of the way he moved, like every room he entered had been built specifically for him to cross. It went quiet because of what he did next. He walked past the hostess, past the bar, past the reserved section with its white tablecloths and its flickering candles, and the table his assistant had booked 3 days in advance. He walked all the way to the back of Marlowe's Bistro, the least glamorous table in the room, the one near the kitchen door that smelled faintly of dish soap and garlic, and he sat down, right across from a plus-sized woman in a stained server's apron who was eating her break meal alone with a paperback novel open beside her plate. The woman looked up. She had green eyes and flour on her cheek, and the particular expression of someone who had been interrupted mid-sentence of a book they were actually enjoying. "This section is closed," she said. He looked at her like he hadn't heard her say something inconvenient. "I'll have whatever you're having." Her name was Nora Callahan, and she had absolutely no idea that the man sitting across from her was Rafael Diaz, the most feared man in all of Miami. But she was about to find out. Before we go any further, please like and subscribe to the channel, and let me know what city you're watching from in the comments. All right, let's continue.
Nora had worked at Marlowe's Bistro for 2 years. And in those 2 years, she had learned 3 things with certainty: that the kitchen staff were the only honest people in the building, that customers tipped based on appearance more than service, and that she fell into the category of people who were tipped less. She had heard every variation: fat, slow, hard to look at. Once, a table of women in cocktail dresses had asked the manager if they could have a different server, someone more presentable, they said, without meeting her eyes. The manager had reassigned her to the back section without apologizing. Nora had gone back to the kitchen, taken 30 seconds in the walk-in refrigerator, where the cold helped, and then gone back to work. She was 26 years old, and she had been doing the version of that walk-in refrigerator reset her whole life, taking the hit, steadying herself, going back out. It was not the same as being okay with it.
It was just the thing she did because the alternative was letting people who meant nothing to her define what she was worth, and she had decided at 17 that no one got to do that. So when the man in the impossible suit sat down across from her at her break table and looked at her like she was something worth looking at, not inspecting, not assessing, just looking, she did not flutter. She did not lose her words. She set her fork down and said, "I told you, this section is closed." "I know. I prefer it." She studied him. Dark hair, dark eyes that didn't blink often enough to be comfortable, a jaw that looked like it had been constructed by someone with opinions on angles, a neck tattoo peeking above the collar of a shirt that had no business being that white. "Are you lost?" she asked. Something moved at the edge of his mouth. "No." She picked her fork back up. "Then you can sit, but I'm not taking your order. My break ends in 4 minutes, and I'm trying to finish this chapter."
He said nothing. He sat, and for the remaining 4 minutes of her break, Rafael Diaz, who had not been told no in so long he'd forgotten what the word sounded like, sat quietly across from a woman eating pasta and reading a novel, and did not speak again until she closed the book and stood up. "Same time tomorrow?" he said. She looked at him. "That depends. Are you going to tell me your name?" "Rafael." "Nora," she said, and she went back to work. She did not see him pull out his phone and call Marco, his head of security, and say only, "Find out who she is." She didn't know that was how it always started with him. Information first, then everything else.
His full name was Rafael Alejandro Diaz. He had come to Miami from Medellin at 21 with nothing but a name, his father's name, which opened a door his father had died before he could walk through himself. He had walked through it alone. By 25, he controlled 3 import routes and a legitimate hotel brand that his accountants kept absolutely clean. By 28, the people who moved things in the dark referred to him in whispers. By 31, which was now, he had reached the particular altitude of power where almost no one told him the truth anymore.
Everyone around him performed for him, smiled for him, agreed with him, positioned themselves in his light the way plants turn towards sun, not because they loved the sun, but because they needed it to survive. He had started disappearing into the city once a month, shedding the suit sometimes or not. It didn't matter. People looked past what they expected to look past, sitting in ordinary places, eating ordinary food, trying to remember what it felt like to be spoken to like a person instead of a force. He had not expected Nora Callahan. He came back the next night and the night after. Each time he sat in the closed back section. Each time she brought him coffee she made herself from the kitchen, not from the front server station, because she said the front pot had been sitting too long and she had standards. Each time they talked for however long her break lasted, sometimes 10 minutes, once 22. He learned things. That she had grown up in a small town in Ohio, that she had come to Miami at 19 following a plan that had not survived contact with reality, and had stayed because she refused to go back and admit defeat to people who had expected her to, that she had one friend, a Haitian woman named Celestine, who worked the lunch shift and texted her memes at midnight, that she read 3 books a week and had opinions about all of them that she delivered with the confidence of someone who had never been told her opinions mattered and decided to have them anyway. She learned almost nothing about him. He was careful about that. But on the 5th night, she looked at him across the small table in the back section and said, "You know a lot about me, and I know almost nothing about you. That's not how this works. How does it work? Equal, or it stops." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I run a business, import and export. I have a sister in Bogota who I talk to every Sunday. I don't sleep well. I built something in this city from nothing, and I don't know, some mornings, whether to be proud of it or not." It was more truth than he had told anyone in 2 years.
She picked up her coffee cup. "That's a start," she said. "Same time tomorrow." He watched her go back to her tables and felt something in his chest that he had forgotten the name of. What he had not told her was that someone was watching her. Not because of her, because of him. Marco had flagged it on the 3rd night, a car that had been parked across the street twice. Same position, slightly different angle. Someone with a telephoto lens. Someone cataloging who Rafael Diaz chose to spend his time with. In Rafael's world, that was never coincidence. That was intelligence gathering, and intelligence gathering meant someone was planning something. He had not told Nora, because telling her would require explaining things he was not ready to explain. So instead, on the 4th night, he had quietly arranged for Felix to park outside Marlowe's until her shift ended and drive her home, framed as a car service the restaurant had partnered with. Nora thought it was a perk. Felix had said nothing, because Felix always said nothing. Rafael told himself he was managing a security situation. He did not examine the feeling that came when Felix reported that she had gotten home safely.
On the 6th night, he arrived at Marlowe's and found her table in the back section occupied by someone else, a man, tall, good-looking in the way of someone who had been told so often enough that he believed it like a fact. He was leaning across the table toward Nora with the posture of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. Nora was sitting back, one arm crossed, the particular expression on her face of someone being patient with something that was not earning patience. Rafael stood at the entrance to the back section for exactly 3 seconds. Then he walked to the table, pulled out the chair beside Nora, not across from her, beside her, sat down and said to the man, "This section is closed." The man stared at him. "Excuse me?" "Private reservation." Rafael looked at Nora briefly, a look that was asking her something without using words. She looked back at him and, after a half-second of deciding, said nothing to contradict him. The man left. People generally left when Rafael used that particular voice. When he was gone, Nora turned to look at Rafael directly. "Who are you?" she said. Not angry, genuine. The question had been building. "I told you, Rafael. Rafael who works in import and export and doesn't sleep well." She held his gaze. "That's not all of it." A long pause. No, he said, it isn't. Tell me the rest.
He looked at her green eyes and her steady expression, and the way she held herself with the posture of someone who had never let anyone make her smaller, even when they had tried very hard. He said, "Not yet, but I will." She considered that. "When?" "When I'm sure it won't change the way you look at me." Something shifted in her face. "That's the most honest thing you've said." "I know." She picked up her coffee. "Then I'll wait," she said. "But don't make me wait long." He told himself it was simply that she deserved the truth, and he was not ready to lose the 1 hour a day that felt like the only real thing in his life. He did not look too closely at why that was. The first time someone at Marlowe's said something about Nora in front of him, it was the assistant manager, a thin man in his 40s named Brett, who had the manner of someone who had been overlooked for promotions his whole career and had decided the staff beneath him would absorb the cost of that. Raphael was at the back table, coffee in hand, waiting for Nora's break, when Brett came through the kitchen door and said to a passing busboy, not bothering to lower his voice, "Tell Nora to roll herself a little faster. Tables 3 and 5 have been waiting 8 minutes." The busboy disappeared. Brett turned to notice Raphael for the first time and froze.
Raphael said nothing. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked at Brett with the particular quality of attention he needed in rooms where he needed people to understand something without having to say it plainly. It was a look that Marco had once described as watching a very calm animal decide whether you were worth the energy. Brett turned and went back through the kitchen door faster than he'd come out. When Nora appeared 2 minutes later with her break meal, Raphael said, "Your assistant manager." She sat down. "Brett, what about him?" "He spoke about you." She looked at him. "What did he say?" He told her. Her expression went through several things quickly. A flash of something hurt that she sealed off almost immediately, then a familiar tiredness, then a particular kind of set to her jaw. "She does that," she said. "I've reported it twice. Nothing happens." "Nothing will happen," Raphael said, "through that channel." She looked at him sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means there are other channels." "Raphael," her voice was careful, "I don't want someone to make a problem disappear on my behalf. I want to handle my own situations." He looked at her. "I know." "Then don't." He picked up his coffee. "I'll think about it," he said, which was not the same as agreeing, and she knew it. She pointed her fork at him. "I'm serious." "I know you are." She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she went back to her food. Brett resigned 3 days later, citing personal reasons. The resignation letter was entirely his own decision. Raphael had simply ensured that certain information about Brett's conduct became available to Marlowe's corporate ownership through a channel that had nothing to do with Nora. The information was accurate. The outcome was clean. He did not tell her. He would regret that later. The plot twist came from a woman named Valentina. Valentina Reyes was 34 years old, spectacularly beautiful in the calculated way of someone who had understood from an early age that beauty was a resource and invested in it accordingly. She had been Raphael's companion, not girlfriend, companion. The distinction was important, for the better part of a year, 2 years ago. When Raphael had ended things, she had taken it with the composed grace of someone filing it away for later. Later, it turned out, was now. Nora was coming out of Marlowe's at the end of her shift on a Thursday night when the woman approached her. Raphael had told Nora nothing about Valentina because he had told Nora very little about his past, and because he did not yet understand that the silences he thought were protecting her were actually just gaps she would eventually have to navigate blind. Valentina looked at Nora the way certain people look at something they find beneath consideration but have chosen to deal with anyway. "You're the waitress," she said.
Nora stopped. "I'm a waitress. Can I help you?" "I'm going to save you some time." Valentina's voice was smooth and practiced. "Rafael Diaz keeps people around until they stop being useful. You're a curiosity to him, something different from his usual world. He'll grow bored." Nora looked at her steadily.
And you are? A pause, just slightly too long. Someone who knows him very well. Okay, Nora said. Thanks for the warning. She started walking. Valentina said behind her, he had a background check done on you before he ever spoke to you. Did he tell you that? Nora stopped. She stood on the sidewalk in the warm Miami night and felt the information land like something placed carefully on a table. Not thrown, placed, deliberate. She turned around. What did you say? Valentina's expression was the expression of someone who had just pressed exactly the right button. He had you investigated before he sat down at your table. That's what he does. He doesn't meet people. He assesses them. She paused. Did he not mention it? Nora said nothing. Valentina walked away. She didn't come to Marlowe's the next 2 nights. On the 3rd night, she came back, sat at the break table in the back section, and when Raphael arrived at his usual time and sat across from her, she said, "There was a woman outside Marlowe's Thursday, Valentina Reyes." His expression shifted, something controlled and quick, sealed off before it opened fully. What did she say? That you had me investigated before you spoke to me. Silence. Is that true? Nora said. He looked at her directly. Yes. She breathed in once, steadily. When? Before the first night. I saw you through the window during a drive-by. Something. He stopped. Started again. Something made me want to know who you were before I decided to come in. Something, she said flatly. You were laughing at something in your book, completely alone, on your break, and you were laughing like it was the best thing you'd read all year. And he paused, I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed like that, about anything. She was quiet for a long moment. The kitchen door swung behind them. The restaurant hummed. The file, she said. What was in it? Your name? Where you grew up?
Where you live? Your employment history? He paused. A misdemeanor from 3 years ago. You threw a man's phone into a fountain because he was recording a woman without her consent. She looked at him. You knew all of that before you sat down. Yes. You never told me. No. She stood up. Not dramatically, just stood. I need you to understand something, she said. I grew up being talked about instead of spoken to, being assessed instead of met, being the thing people decided things about before they gave me the chance to be a person. Her voice was steady, but something in it was the steadiest thing he had ever heard. The steadiness of someone who has felt the same wound enough times to know exactly where it sits. You did the same thing. You just did it with more resources. He said nothing, because she was right. I'm not saying it's the same as cruelty, she said. I'm saying it wasn't honest, and honesty is the only thing I actually ask for. She picked up her bag. Nora, she turned. I looked up facts, he said. I came back because of you. Those are different things. I know, she said. That's the only reason I'm going to think about it instead of just leaving. She left. He sat alone at the back table for a long time after the restaurant closed, and no one came to ask him to go because he was Raphael Diaz, and people did not ask him to go anywhere. He sat there and thought about the difference between protecting yourself with information and hiding behind it, and whether he had ever known how to do anything differently, and whether it was too late to learn. She texted him 4 days later. Not a long message, 3 words. Still thinking. Wait. He waited. On the 8th day, she called him. He answered on the first ring, which she had never done with anyone. Nora, I have a question, she said. Ask it. If I'd been someone different, someone who wasn't worth sitting down for after you read the file, would you have come in anyway? He thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. No, probably not. Okay, she said. It's an honest one, she said. That's what I asked for. A pause.
Come to Marlowe's tomorrow, but this time I need you to tell me the real version of what you do, not the import and export version. The silence that followed was the heaviest one they had had. If I tell you that, he said, it changes things. I know, she said. Tell me anyway.
He came to Marlowe's the next evening, not at break time, after closing. He waited until the last customer left, until the front staff had gone, until the kitchen was quiet. Nora had stayed. Hector, the cook who had worked at Marlowe's for 15 years and trusted Nora the way old trees trust the ground, had stayed too, though he made himself busy at the far end of the kitchen and did not intrude. Raphael sat across from her at the back table and told her the truth. Not all of it. There were things that existed to protect the people around them, and those he kept. But the architecture, the shape of what he was, the organization, the parts of it that were not legitimate, the reputation he had built, and the cost of it. Nora listened the way she read, completely, without interrupting, absorbing. When he finished, she looked at her hands on the table for a moment, then at him. "Have you hurt innocent people?" she said. "Not directly," he said. "I have been part of a world where that happens. Are you trying to get out of it?" He paused. "I don't know how to answer that yet." She nodded slowly. "Okay, that's all. Okay? I'm not naive," she said. "I grew up with people who did things that weren't clean. I know the world isn't divided into good people and bad people. I know it's more complicated." She looked at him steadily. "But I need you to be working towards something better. Not there yet. I don't need there yet. But working toward it. I can tell you that honestly. Yes." She looked at him for a long time. The restaurant was quiet. The kitchen light hummed. "Then we can figure out the rest," she said. He looked at her. This woman who had been told her whole life that she was too much in the ways that didn't count, and not enough in the ways that did, and felt something in his chest that he had been careful not to name since the moment he'd watched her laugh alone at a book in the back of an ordinary restaurant. He was done being careful about naming it. "Nora," he said. "Yeah, I need to tell you something else." She waited. "There's a man named Christian Fuentes," he said. "He runs an operation that competes with mine. For the past 3 weeks, he has had someone watching you. Not because of you, because of me. Because people in my world use what's close to you as leverage." Her expression changed, not to fear, to that particular version of her steadiness that was, he had learned, actually the most alert version of her. "How long have you known?" she said. 3 weeks. "And you didn't tell me." "No." She sat back. "Raphael, I was managing it." "You were managing it," she repeated, "without telling me, while I was walking home, taking the car Felix sent." She stopped. "Felix, the car service that Marlowe supposedly partnered with." He said nothing. "That was you." "Yes." She pressed both hands flat on the table. "You cannot keep making decisions about my safety without telling me. I am not something to be managed. I am a person who deserves to know when she is in danger." "You're right," he said immediately. No delay, no qualification. She looked at him. "Is it handled? The man watching me?" "Yes. As of 2 days ago." "How?" "Fuentes and I reached an arrangement." "It's done," she breathed. "I need you to promise me something. Anything. No more managing things on my behalf without telling me. I can handle information. What I can't handle is being kept in the dark by someone who's supposed to." She stopped. "Supposed to what?" he said quietly. She looked at him. The restaurant was very quiet. "Care about me," she said. "I was going to say care about me." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. He had not touched her before, not once. In all the weeks of break tables and coffee and careful conversation, his hand over hers was the first time. "I care about you," he said, not softly, directly, the way he said everything that was true. "I have been trying not to say it because I wasn't sure I had earned the right to." She looked at his hand on hers, then at his face. "You haven't earned it yet," she said, and then before he could move, "But you're getting there." The kiss happened 3 weeks later. It was not at Marlowe's. It was outside, on a Tuesday evening, on the small bridge over the canal 2 blocks from the restaurant, where they had started taking walks after her shift, because he said he liked walking.
and she suspected he liked having somewhere to be that wasn't about power. She had just told him about her mother, about the woman who had raised her alone in Ohio, and who had told her once, when Nora was 11 and crying after something a classmate had said, "You are going to be the kind of woman people underestimate for their entire lives. Let them."
It costs you nothing, and it costs them everything. She told him this with a small smile, the smile of someone who has had the right words said to them at the right moment and has been living off them ever since. He stopped walking. She turned to look at him. What? He was looking at her with the expression she had seen building for weeks, the one that was careful, and then suddenly wasn't. "Your mother was right," he said. "I know. About all of it. They underestimated you. Every single one of them." He paused. "Including me. When I read that file, I thought I was learning who you were. I had no idea." She held his gaze. "What do you know now?" "That you are the most honest person I have ever stood in the same room as," he said. "That you held yourself together in situations that would have broken most people I know, and you did it quietly, without asking anyone to acknowledge it. That you made me want to be the kind of man who deserves to sit across from you." The canal moved quietly below them. Miami hummed in the middle distance. "That's a lot," she said. "Yes. You said you wanted to be that man. Present tense. Yes. Not past. Not future. Present," he said. "Right now. I'm working on it right now." She looked at him for a moment that was longer than a moment. Then she said, "Then come here." And he closed the distance between them and kissed her on the bridge over the canal, with the city lit up behind them. Not tentatively, not like a question, but like something that had already been decided and was only now being said aloud. When they broke apart, she looked at him with those green eyes that had looked at him from the beginning, like he was someone worth seeing clearly, and said, "Don't make me regret this." "I won't," he said. It wasn't a promise dressed up in words. It was the flattest, most undecorated thing he had ever said, which was exactly why she believed it. There was still the matter of his world. There was his second in command, a man named Dante, who had served Raphael for 6 years, and who looked at Nora with an expression of professional concern that had nothing to do with her personally, and everything to do with what she represented. A vulnerability in someone who had built his safety on having none.
There was his mother, who flew in from Medellin 4 months in and sat across from Nora at dinner with the measuring eyes of a woman who had watched her son become something enormous and frightening and had never stopped hoping he would also become something human. By the end of the dinner, she had asked Nora about the book she was reading, and the conversation had lasted 45 minutes. And when Raphael looked between the two women, the only two in his life who had ever told him things he needed to hear instead of things he wanted to, he felt something so unfamiliar he had to look away. There was Valentina, who made one more attempt, this time through a journalist, a planted story, a photograph taken through a restaurant window of Raphael and a woman described in the piece as unlikely company for Miami's most powerful businessman. The words were not kind. The implication was that he had lost his mind or his standards or both. Nora read it on her phone during her break. She set the phone down and ate the rest of her pasta. Raphael saw the article and called the publication within the hour, not to threaten, to inform them through appropriate channels that the source they had used, Valentina, had a history of planting false narratives that constituted defamation and that his legal team would be in touch. The article was corrected and then removed within 48 hours. He told Nora what he'd done this time. She looked at him over her coffee cup. "You told me first. I promised you." "You did." She set the cup down. "Thank you." It was 2 words. They landed like something enormous. 6 months after a man in an impossible suit sat down uninvited at a waitress's break table in the back section of an ordinary restaurant, Nora Callahan stood in the kitchen of the penthouse that had become, incrementally and without any formal announcement, somewhere she also lived. She was making coffee, not from the front pot. She had strong opinions about letting coffee sit. Raphael was at the kitchen table with his laptop and 3 separate stacks of documents that she had long since accepted as his version of relaxed. He looked up. The morning light came through the penthouse windows and caught her the way light sometimes catches people, honestly, without the person knowing, in the unperformed version of themselves. She was in a large shirt that was his,
Her hair was still messy from sleeping. She was frowning at the coffee maker with the focused expression she brought to everything she took seriously. He had been looked at his whole life with awe or fear or calculation. No one had ever looked at him the way she did, like he was a person she had decided to know completely, including the inconvenient parts, including the parts he was still working on, and found the whole thing worth it. "You're staring," she said without turning around. "I know. Is something wrong?" "No," he said. "Nothing is wrong." She turned and looked at him with those green eyes. "You have a face right now." "What kind of face?" She studied him.
The kind where you're thinking something you haven't figured out how to say yet. He closed the laptop. He looked at her across the kitchen. This woman who had been told she was too much, not enough, unlikely, the wrong size, the wrong look, the wrong table in the wrong section, who had absorbed all of it and decided none of it was the final word on who she was. "I love you," he said. No preamble, no construction around it, just the words. She stood very still for a moment. Then she set down the coffee and crossed the kitchen and stood in front of him and looked at his face like she was reading the last sentence of a book she had been reading for a long time and finding it meant exactly what she thought it did. "I know," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "That's all?" "I've known for a while," she said. "I was waiting for you to catch up. And I love you too." She said it the same way he had. No decoration, no softness added to make it go down easier. Just true. "You are the most frustrating person I have ever met, and you have more walls than a building, and you once had me investigated before you introduced yourself, and I love you anyway. That should tell you something about how serious it is." He reached up and took her hand. "It does," he said. She sat down beside him. He opened the laptop again. She picked up her coffee. Outside the penthouse windows, Miami was doing what it always did, bright and relentless, and entirely indifferent to the two people inside, building something ordinary and extraordinary in the same kitchen, one honest moment at a time. No one who had sat at those front tables, no one who had looked past her at Marlowe's, or spoken about her like she wasn't there, or told her she was the wrong kind of woman for any room she entered. None of them were here. Just Nora and Raphael, and the quiet that existed between people who had chosen each other clearly, with full information, and meant it. That was everything.